Today we are going to go through the basic operation of Unreal Engine. To open the engine, first we have to open the Epic Games Launcher and navigate down to Unreal Engine. If you have the engine installed, we can just click this launch button, but if we have not installed the engine, we would first go to Library, add an engine version, and we can install from here. We can use this drop-down box to pick which version we want. Our class is going to be using the latest version of Unreal 5, which is 5.5.4. After a short load, we are greeted with the Unreal Project Browser. It opens up to the Recent Projects tab, where we can see all our recent projects. I currently have one of them. We can navigate through these other tabs, which all contain different types of templates that we can use if we are creating a specific type of project. We are going to be using a blank project. On the bottom, first you can select where the project is going to be stored, and to the right we are going to give the project a sensible name. And just above the project name, there are a few options we can set, either Blueprint or C++. In this class and throughout your career, we will probably mostly end up using Blueprint projects, and we will keep the other options as is. We will check the starter content box. And then we hit create. Once our project has finished loading, we are greeted with the main engine screen. Before we begin learning about how to navigate around, let us take a moment and look at the different windows that we have access to. The biggest window is called the viewport, and this is a 3D representation of our level. We will be dragging assets onto the viewport, we'll move our assets around, and this is generally how we're going to go around building the level. Above the viewport is a selection of toolbars. The functions of these tools will become more clear as we learn about Unreal Engine. To the bottom, we have the content browser, and this is where we are going to import all our content. We can create folders and save our things in the different folders, and it is good practice to keep our assets as organized as possible. One important feature of the content browser is this search bar. When we type in the name of an asset, we can see that it searches through all the content and it displays everything that has that title. Since we imported the starter content, we have access to a lot of assets to start with, and this is going to help us in our projects as we don't need to spend time building those and we can focus on the programming. To the right, we have two more windows. We have the outliner, and this is a list representation of everything that's in the level. So everything that's in the viewport is also in the asset in the outliner. And we can see this by selecting different assets, and we can see that it highlights in the viewport. And when I select another asset, it highlights it in the viewport. So these two are the exact same thing, just two different representations. Below that, we have the details panel. When we select an object either in the viewport or in the outliner, our details panel will show us all the options we have for that object. So let me take a moment, go into starter content, props, and I'm just going to drag this chair out. And as you can see, when I let go, this chair now exists in the world. It has shown up in the viewport. It has also shown up in the outliner. And below, in the details panel, we can see all the options this chair has. It's got a transform, it's got a location, rotation, scale. We will talk about that more shortly. It's got a mesh that we can assign to it. It's got materials that it has, as well as some physics options and a lot more options. Then as we get into the engine, will become more clear what's useful and which one of these we don't really have much use for. Now let us move on to the basics of viewport navigation. We can navigate the viewport in a few different ways. We can hold right click and move our mouse around. This will rotate our camera, similar to how it would in any first-person game. We're just moving our head. We can hold the middle mouse button and we can drag, and this pans the camera around. Or we can use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out. While holding right click down, we can use the WSAD keys, again similar to a first person game, to navigate around the viewport. You can hold shift, which will make you stop, or you can let go of WSAD and that makes you stop as well. While moving around, you can use the scroll wheel to increase the speed that we're flying at if you scroll up, and you can reduce the speed that we're flying at if you scroll down. We can see our current speed by looking at the top left of the viewport with the number that is next to the camera icon. And finally, one very important feature is the focus key. When we select an asset, we can hit the F key and that will just move our camera to that object. While we are focused on an object, if we hold Alt and the left mouse button, we can rotate around the object. And this is a very good way to look at our objects in the scene view and visually inspect them. Next, let's go over basic asset manipulation in the scene. When we select an asset, we are greeted with a gizmo. The gizmo is color coded, and there's three colors to it. We have blue for the Z-axis, which in Unreal means up. We have red for the X-axis, and green for the Y-axis. We have three basic operations we can perform. Translation, which is moving the position, rotation, and scaling. We can select between which operation we want through this box up here, or we can use the hotkeys, which you can see when you hover over these, which would be W for moving, E for rotation, and R for scale. To actually perform the operation, all we do is you use our mouse to hover over the gizmo. You can see that whichever axis we hover over gets highlighted. So if I hover over Z and I hold left click and move my mouse, we're moving the asset on the Z axis. The same is true for rotation as well as scale. We can also grab the area between two axes. So if I hover my mouse over between the blue and the red, you can see it selects both the Z and the X axis. And now we uniformly perform the operation on both those axes. This is something that becomes very useful for moving. So for example, I want to move this object on the ground. It becomes useful to just use the X and the Y axis and move around that way. We can also go to the center of the gizmo, also known as the origin, and that will let us move it in all the axes at once. It's not very useful for move, but for scale it's good because it lets us uniformly scale the asset up. We can perform these exact same actions in the details panel. You can see there's location, rotation, scale. If I was to just click and drag, I can change the location on the x-axis. I can even type in a number and you can see it moves there. I'll hit F to focus on it. And finally, for scale, there's this lock button which lets us uniformly scale the object. If it was unlocked and I was to raise one of the values, you can see it's only that axis changing. However, if we were to lock it, everything changes at once. Again, very useful for scale because we usually want to scale our objects uniformly. On this top bar, we have some other very important options. We can cycle the gizmo through different coordinate systems. We have a global coordinate system and a local coordinate system. And finally, we have two other options to let us use a grid for either rotation or movement. If I was to turn the grid off, you could see my movement is very smooth. However, when I turn the grid on, my movement happens in increments. We can change this increment with this number here. So if I was to change it from a grid size of 10 to 50, you can see now when I move it, it moves in larger chunks. The same is true for rotation. Right now it is rotating with a snap. You can see this by looking at the number, and it rotates in 10-degree increments. If I was to turn this off, now I'm getting all the fine detail tuning between those 10 degrees. We can, just like with movement, we can also change the angle that it rotates by. And the same is true for scale. Scale defaults to scaling by 0.25. We can change those, and we can also turn off snapping. Finally, we have the camera speed. We saw this earlier with the scroll wheel, But we can also come in here and we can change the camera speed directly. Lastly, there's an option here that maximizes or restores this viewport. And all that does is when we click it, it lets us see our game from different angles. So you can see here, this is the back view, the right view, and the top view. This viewport becomes very useful when you're level designing and moving different objects, especially to align things. And as we start getting into our level design for our Project 1, you'll start getting more use out of this tool. We can click on this the same button to get back here. One last feature of the viewport is making it full screen. We can hit the F11 key and you can see that it becomes full screen. Another way to do it is to hit this the burger menu here, and at the very bottom we see immersive mode. If we click that, we can toggle between the two. Finally, just as we did with the maximize or restore viewport, which lets us see all 4 views at once, we can use this button here that says perspective, and we can do the same thing. We can go into a top view, bottom, left, right, front, back, or back to perspective. Again, these are very useful when it comes to set dressing and designing the level for aligning objects and just placing things where they should be. Finally, the last thing we're going to learn is the basics of modeling using Unreal's modeling tool. We're going to dive deep into this later. As you guys do your Project 1, you'll be using these tools to help build the level that your player is going to play in. And today we're just going to go over the basics because it's going to get us using the engine and making things, which is the fun part. So to start, I don't want this level. I'm going to make a new level. We can do that. But before we do that, we are going to make a folder to organize our level and put it into. We will, in the content browser, right click, and you can see a menu pops up. This menu contains a lot of options, and it basically contains all the assets that Unreal will let us add. You'd see things from materials to things for animations, for effects, your particle effects. There's a lot of options here. When you have time, it's nice to look through these. You can even hover over things and hold Control and Alt, which will give you a better description of what each object is. It's good to go and look through these things. We won't be using a lot of these in this class, but as you learn the engine, you're going to see that a lot of these things become useful. I'm going to click on the New Folder button, which will create a new folder. I will name it Levels. And when I double click, you can see I can go in there, and it's empty right now. We could right click and add a level through here, but I'm going to do it using a shortcut by going back to our viewport and hitting Control plus N. And you can see there's a dialog box that's letting us choose a type of level to open. We are going to go with a basic level. You could choose an empty level, but a basic level is good to get started. It comes with a light as well as a sky sphere, so things just aren't dark. In an empty level, you just have to add those things yourself. I'll hit the Create button. You can see a box pops up telling me that we have unsaved content. That is because when we opened this level and we started making changes in it, we never saved those changes. We don't want this level, so we're going to hit Don't Save, but this is a very nice box that Unreal has because it prevents us from accidentally losing changes that we have made that we forgot to save. I'm going to hit Don't Save. You see it opens up a new level, and as you can see, it already has a bunch of items in it. It's got a sky sphere, it's got some lights, as well as this little platform for us to start modeling on. So to use Unreal's modeling tools, we come up to this toolbar here. You can see currently we're in selection mode. When we click the drop down, you can see all the different modes that Unreal has. We're going to focus on the modeling mode. When we click it, on the left hand side, you can see there are different options that pop up. And we're going to focus on the primitives, which is box, sphere, cylinder, capsule, cone. You will get a lot of use out of these, as well as stairs. It's not a primitive, but very useful to have. So to create an object, all we do is click on it, and you can see now when I move around, I can move my box around, and if I was to click, it would place it there. On the left hand side, you notice that our panel has changed to something similar to the details panel, where there's a bunch of options for this particular object. Each object might have some different options. You can always play around with them. If I was to change the width, you can see the width is changing. Same with the depth and height, and there's a bunch of other problems. Another important one to look at is the material. When you, if it was your first time creating an object, this material slot might be empty, but because we imported the starter asset, there's a lot of materials we can choose from. All we hit is this drop-down box, and you can see all the different materials that the starter content has. All I have done is selected cobblestone. Now, one important thing to note. When you first create your object, try your best to use this width, depth, and height to scale the object. You can always move the object into the place you want to, focus on it, really get a good look at it, and then change these values so that it fits. And the reason we do that is you can see when I'm changing this that the cobblestone's texture changes with it. If I was to hit this accept button, which now turns this from an Unreal kind of model into a static mesh, you can see that if I was to go to scale and scale it, now all of a sudden the cobblestone's not changing size, it is stretching with our object. So to get a nice look, it is best to scale it before we accept it. Once we have accepted this object, we cannot change its scale anymore, so that is just something to be aware of. Later on, as you guys continue your game development journey, you will not be using these modeling tools in Unreal to create your levels. We will be creating our modeling, all our models and our textures in an outside software, either Maya or Blender, and then bringing it into Unreal. But for these projects, because we are not in a modeling course, we are in a coding course, we are going to use these to create our levels. If once you've made changes, you can go to this transform and hit transform to get that gizmo again, which we had used. But you can see even this, it's not going to let me scale it the way it did with the width, depth, and height, which would scale the texture along. So it's just something to be aware of. You can go back, we can add as many assets as we want. Another nice feature is with the asset selected, if we go on to mesh, we can go into triangle edit mode. Oops, I have the wrong mesh selected. We can go to triangle edit mode, and we can actually grab different components and move them around. This lets us make any shaped object we want. Very nice feature in Unreal, and again, very nice for our level prototypes, because it lets us make custom shapes without having to use an external modeling software to make these changes and put them in the level. So you guys will find yourself using this a lot when we are making our project 1 and 2. I just wanted to give you the basic taste of it so that you can start playing around with it. That's all for our week 1, day 1 tutorials. Thank you for watching.